QuitSmokingWeed.com, the podcast on Spotify.
Most people who decide to quit weed harbor a silent fear about gaining a massive amount of weight. And you hear two completely conflicting expectations floating around out there in the community.
Yeah, and they both kind of make sense if you do not know the biology.
The first expectation is that you will automatically lose weight because the munchies are gone. People assume that without those intense cravings for snacks, well, the calorie intake will just drop off a cliff.
Right, and the second expectation is basically the exact opposite.
People assume they will just eat normally once the drug is out of their system. They think their weight will not change at all.
They expect their body to just seamlessly transition back to a baseline that, might not have existed for years.
But neither of those assumptions is really accurate.
No, they are not.
Yeah.
Today, we are pulling from addiction recovery timelines, endocrinology research, and behavioral psychology to answer one mission. We need to uncover the biological truth of what actually happens to your appetite and your weight.
Because that reality is far more useful than relying on either of those myths. When you base your expectations on a myth, you are setting yourself up for panic when your body does something unexpected.
So to understand what happens to your body when you stop, we have to look closely at the biological mechanism of what was happening while you were actively using.
The munchies are usually treated like this quirky side effect, like snacking just happens to be a fun activity when you are high. Media portrays it as a joke.
People talk about it like it is just a lack of self-control or an enhanced appreciation for flavor, but that fundamentally misses the biological reality of what is taking place inside the brain.
We are talking about THC activating CB1 receptors in the hypothalamus.
We need to define what those receptors are and what they actually do. Your body has its own natural endocannabinoid system. It is a complex network designed to maintain homeostasis, which is just a fancy way of saying it keeps your internal systems balanced.
And the hypothalamus is the specific brain center that regulates hunger and satiety, right? It manages your temperature, your thirst, and your energy balance.
Under normal circumstances, your body produces small amounts of its own natural cannabinoids. It gently stimulates those CB1 receptors when you actually need food.
But flooding those receptors with a heavy external source of THC creates a massive pharmacological effect.
You are directly manipulating your brain's hunger signaling at a chemical level. This is not a psychological suggestion to eat. It is a biological command.
So if we put this in practical terms, it is like a car's fuel gauge being manually rigged to read empty every single day. The tank might be completely full.
You might have just eaten a huge meal.
But the dashboard is flashing red, warning you that the car is going to stall if you do not refuel immediately. If you drive that car for years with a rigged gauge, you completely lose touch with what a genuine empty tank looks like.
The daily artificial stimulation overwrites your baseline completely. Because of that daily artificial stimulation, your actual biological hunger cues get severely dulled over time.
The human body is incredibly efficient, right?
Yeah, very efficient. If an external chemical is doing the heavy lifting of stimulating hunger, the natural internal systems step back. We call this downregulation. Downregulation is essentially like wearing earplugs at a very loud concert.
Your brain turns down the volume on its own natural receptors because the external THC is constantly screaming at it.
Daily users might eat significantly more calories overall, but they completely lose the ability to differentiate between real biological hunger and chemically induced hunger. The brain stops listening to the stomach. It only listens to the chemical trigger.
You end up eating on a schedule dictated by your usage patterns rather than your actual metabolism.
That creates a profound disconnect between what you eat and what you need. Your body is asking for calories it has no physical use for.
The satiety signals that normally tell you to put the fork down are completely overridden by the constant activation of those CB1 receptors.
The chemical floods the system and demands more fuel regardless of the actual physical state of your digestion.
Okay, so if my brain's fuel gauge is broken and reading empty all the time, what actually happens on day one when I take away the drug? The immediate aftermath of quitting usually goes in the exact opposite direction of what people fear.
Instead of instant weight gain, the appetite often plummets first.
Eating does not feel interesting at all. Food can taste flat or completely unappealing. If you are in week 1 right now, you probably know this exact feeling.
You stare at your favorite pizza, and the mechanical act of chewing and swallowing feels like an absolute chore.
The brain is suddenly missing the primary chemical trigger it relied on to signal hunger for months or years.
Without the THC activating those receptors, the hypothalamus essentially goes quiet. Remember the earplugs at the concert. When the loud music suddenly stops, you cannot hear normal conversations right away because you still have the earplugs in.
Your receptors are still downregulated.
It takes time for the natural signaling system to boot back up. It has to remove the earplugs and realize it needs to generate gentle hunger cues on its own again.
I remember noticing how common it is for people to be completely thrown off by losing a few pounds early on. I was bracing so hard for immediate weight gain that the lack of appetite felt very confusing.
That initial weight loss is just the physical manifestation of your brain recalibrating its hunger signaling. This profound appetite suppression is temporary, and it is entirely reversible.
The body is clearing the slate.
We also have to look at the digestive system itself. The gut is loaded with CB1 receptors. The enteric nervous system, which governs your digestion, is going through its own localized withdrawal process.
This is what often leads to mild nausea or a general biological disinterest in digesting heavy meals during the first week. People often try to force themselves to eat during this specific window just to get basic calories into their system.
Forcing food feels difficult because the reward pathway that usually makes eating pleasurable is temporarily muted. But it is crucial to understand that this is a phase of biological healing. Your natural appetite will return as the receptors upregulate and the neurochemistry finds its natural balance again.
But the real challenge with food does not happen when your appetite drops in week 1. The true risk window opens up just as the physical recalibration crashes into emotional turbulence.
We call this the resilience phase.
It starts roughly around day 5 and runs for about 3 weeks. This is the period where withdrawal brings irritability, anxiety, and poor sleep to the surface.
We need to define this risk window clearly. The resilience phase, running through weeks 2, 3, and 4, is where we see the highest risk for weight gain.
The initial nausea fades. The brain starts trying to function without the substance, and the psychological weight of the transition really sets in.
People start getting very hungry again during this phase.
Wait, I have to disagree with a very common assumption people make here. When someone suddenly starts eating everything in sight around week 3, they usually assume their normal biological hunger has finally returned with a vengeance.
I see where you're going with this.
That weight gain has nothing to do with biological hunger returning. If their baseline is still scrambled, they're actually just eating their feelings. It comes from a newly formed emotional gap.
You are completely right. You are looking at a behavioral substitution rather than a biological demand for calories. The withdrawal symptoms we see in the resilience phase create the exact perfect conditions for emotional eating.
People naturally gravitate toward high sugar and high fat foods.
Food easily becomes the new coping tool for people who previously used cannabis to manage uncomfortable feelings. The brain is screaming for relief from the stress of withdrawal.
The chemical baseline for stress management is suddenly gone. The anxiety spikes. The person sits on the couch at 8 in the evening without their usual ritual, and their brain frantically searches for a replacement tool to bring the anxiety back down.
Junk food provides a very fast, very reliable chemical shift. Cortisol levels are elevated during this phase of withdrawal. Cortisol is the body's primary stress hormone. We have to look at why cortisol makes us crave junk food from an evolutionary standpoint.
How does that work?
When cortisol spikes, your brain interprets that stress as a literal physical threat. It thinks you are being chased by a predator. To survive a physical threat, the brain demands fast, dense energy. It demands sugar and fat to fuel a fight or flight response.
So your brain is pushing you toward the pantry to survive a threat that is actually just emotional discomfort?
Exactly. The broken fuel gauge is now blinking rapidly because of stress, not because of your metabolism. People are essentially treating withdrawal symptoms with sugar.
The discomfort of the resilience phase requires an outlet. If you do not consciously choose a healthy outlet, your brain will inevitably choose the easiest one available.
Opening the fridge requires zero effort and provides immediate sensory relief. Weight gain happens when people substitute food for weed without building an alternative coping mechanism.
The food is doing the exact job the cannabis used to do.
This substitution is the primary driver of weight gain in the first month. People who never even struggled with the munchies while using can suddenly find themselves binge eating late at night because they are crawling out of their skin with restlessness.
This emotional eating pattern is heavily driven by exhaustion and stress, but the body eventually forces a biological reset. After the first month, we start to see consistent improvements in the body's systems.
Stabilization generally comes around 7 weeks with active support.
The nervous system settles down, the acute withdrawal symptoms fade, the brain has largely adapted to operating without THC. But let us talk about the domino effect of sleep. If my sleep improves, how exactly does that alter my urge to eat late at night?
There is a direct biological link between your sleep quality and your hunger hormones. We have to look at two specific hormones, ghrelin and leptin. Ghrelin is the hormone that signals hunger. Leptin is the hormone that signals fullness.
Okay.
When you are severely sleep deprived, which is incredibly common in early withdrawal, your body produces significantly more ghrelin. It is a survival response. Your body thinks it needs extra energy to stay awake, so it pumps out the hunger hormone. At the exact same time, poor sleep decreases your levels of leptin.
So when you are trapped in the insomnia of early withdrawal, you are biochemically primed to feel starving, and you never actually feel full.
That explains the physical reality of staring at the ceiling at 2 in the morning. The intense hunger someone feels in that moment is not a lack of willpower. It is a literal chemical survival response triggered by exhaustion.
As your sleep normalizes over those 7 weeks, the late-night eating and the appetite dysregulations settle down organically.
The hormones find their balance. You stop fighting a powerful chemical urge to eat at odd hours. As the brain's natural systems come back online, emotional regulation improves as well.
You are less irritable, which means you need less comfort food to manage your mood. Your energy increases and your physical activity often naturally rises.
The fatigue lifts. People start moving around more just because they physically feel better.
The need to rely on food for comfort decreases as the body restores its internal balance.
The systems of the body are deeply interconnected. Healing your sleep architecture automatically begins healing your metabolic architecture.
With the short-term fluctuations finished and the emotional risk window closed, a clear picture of long-term body composition emerges. Looking at the 6-month mark honestly gives us the most accurate data on what actually happens to most people.
Most heavy daily users who quit report no significant net weight gain at 6 months. The temporary spikes from the resilience phase and the initial drops from week 1 level out completely.
This data often contradicts the narrative most people carry into their quit attempt. They assume quitting is a one-way ticket to gaining a permanent 20 pounds.
The surprising reality is that many individuals actually lose weight they did not expect to lose. We can connect this directly to the shedding of old habits. Daily cannabis use often involves sedentary evenings.
A common pattern is getting high, sitting on the couch, and engaging in THC-stimulated eating for hours.
When you remove the substance, you often naturally remove the sedentary behavior and the excess caloric intake that came tightly packaged with it.
The evenings suddenly open up. You might go for a walk to clear your head instead of raiding the pantry out of habit.
The incidental calories vanish. The physical activity increases because the lethargy is gone. The metabolism stabilizes as the endocannabinoid system returns to its natural function of simply maintaining homeostasis.
This entire process is about understanding a pattern. It is not about managing your body through sheer willpower or restrictive diets.
Those who do gain weight long-term are usually those who swapped weed for food as a stress tool without ever finding a real alternative.
That is a highly solvable problem. It just requires acknowledging the function the behavior is serving. Body changes after quitting are completely normal and they are reversible. They should never be a source of panic.
You do not have to starve yourself. You just have to navigate the transition while your brain recalibrates. The real challenge of quitting is not just about what you remove from your life. It is about how you choose to fill the space it leaves behind.
When the chemical fog clears, you are left with time, energy, and emotions that demand attention.
You have to observe your own high-risk moments for behavioral substitution. Recognize when your brain is asking for an emotional buffer and consciously decide what comes next.
If you want to understand what your body is actually going through in the first weeks after quitting, the free timeline at quit-smoking-weed.com breaks it down step by step.